The Dog and Deuce Show is produced by Dymar Productions in association with Studio B Productions.
Coming to you from the headquarters of Salt Lake City, where we record and broadcast the most hated show in all of America. This is Dog and Deuce number 121. On this episode, we'll talk to college football genius Mr. Phil Steele about the upcoming season. Also, USC captain Mr. Josh Shaw has screwed up really bad. We'll tell you what happened and give you our take. It's Dog and Deuce.
From Studio B in Salt Lake City, this is Dog and Deuce. Join the conversation at doganddeuce.com or send an email to doganddeuce@gmail.com.
This is episode 121 of the Dog and Deuce Show. For more information in the show notes, go to doganddeuce.com.
You can call or text the D&D Show voicemail and text line at 801-477-7678. That's 801-47-SPORT. Send us an email at doganddeuce@gmail.com. I'm Dog.
And I'm Deuce.
And this is episode 121 of Dog and Deuce. Please mind my voice. I've been a little under the weather. Plus, I made a bad decision. When I was sick, I decided to go see a punk rock show last night.
That's a bad decision.
And about halfway through, I'm singing along. I'm screaming my brains out. And I turn to my wife and I say, I got to do a show tomorrow. Plus, I'm already feeling not so good. So
I'm feeling like you're picking on the show now.
I know
it's Bad Religion, Offspring, and all those guys, but, dude.
Well, dude, it's Bad Religion. It's my favorite band. Who should not be opening for the Offspring. I just want to.
Right. I
got to get on my high horse, my soapbox for a minute. And
it confuses me, and I don't know the difference.
Doesn't make sense, man. But you'll have to pardon me as well because I'm a little distracted by our good buddy Phil Steele, who joins us on the show today. I was just flipping through his magazine. This thing is incredible.
It's like is it irreverent for me to say like the Bible of college football?
That's exactly what I would call it.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
It's the Bible of college football. And
it's yearly.
It is. They do it. Yeah. Well, wouldn't it be better if the Bible was updated yearly?
Yeah, it could be.
We mentioned it in the interview, but this magazine that he puts out every single year, it really is every media personality you see, every single one, whether they'll admit it or not, it has a copy of this and has written it up and it's torn up and made notes in the sides and it's
some hide it. They do the old school grade school where they like put the brown paper bag around it and so it looks like their journal.
Right.
We admit it.
Right.
We read this regularly.
No doubt.
I refer to it for information so I can sound somewhat smart.
Exactly.
I mean, imagine how dumb I might sound if I didn't have this handy tool available to me.
Seriously, we're making jokes, but it really is important to show prep and game prep, and it's really important. So it's Phil Steele's college football preview. He does it every year. This is the 20th anniversary, and we talked to him a little bit about that and a little bit what goes into producing this magazine every year. I can't imagine how hectic it's got to be. I mean, researching every single team in all college football has got to be pretty tough.
And it's an accomplishment. Pick it up at your local, wherever you buy your magazines nowadays, kids.
Yeah. And by the way, we're not getting paid to say this.
Right.
At all. I mean, he did.
Not that I'm aware of.
He did send us some complimentary magazines, which I would buy no matter what. In fact, I probably will buy another one.
Right.
But full disclosure, but they're not paying us to say this. We really do love this magazine.
Absolutely.
So let's talk to Phil Steele. He gave us a lot of good insight on what's going on. Keep in mind, we did record this a couple weeks ago, and so at that point, the quarterback decision at the University of Utah had not been decided yet. They're officially decided. So there are a couple other things we discussed that have been a couple issues that have been settled since then. So just keep that in mind. We recorded a couple weeks ago. So, but here it is, Phil Steele, right here on Dog and Deuce.
We want to know what you think. Leave us a rating or review in iTunes. Just search for Dog and Deuce in the iTunes store.
Joining us now on Dog and Deuce is the one and only Mr. Phil Steele. You definitely know Phil if you are a college football fan, because every year he puts out the Phil Steele's college football preview, and it is the manual to college football. Every media personality out there, everyone you've ever met, depends on this magazine dearly to help us get through each season. Phil, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, a pleasure being on. Real good. How about you, gentlemen, this afternoon?
Oh man, we are just so pumped up for the season to start. It is a long off season, definitely. And I understand that that you guys are celebrating a pretty big milestone. It's your 20th year publishing this magazine.
Yeah, 20th year of the magazine, and believe it or not, when it first came out 20 years ago, it was black and white newsprint, and there was less than 200 pages. I know any current reader of the magazine would probably say, that's ridiculous, because it's 352 pages now, as you know. It's more like a book. But, yeah, the first year I only covered 88 teams. Each year it's gotten a little bit bigger, a little bit better. I think we shifted to full color after about 6 or 7 years. And now, as you mentioned, I think everybody in the media uses it as their guide for the upcoming season. And, if you're a casual fan, you're going to open it up and look at the amount of information in there and just say, well, that's too much for me. But if you're a football fan, a college football fan, or a diehard college football fan, you're going to refer to this magazine each and every day during the football season.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I look at it multiple times a day. By the end of the year, it's all scratched up, it's torn up. I got notes coming out of it, papers are falling out of it. So, so I definitely put it to good use for sure. I'm a little curious. This is such a ton of information. I'm curious as to what the process is like of putting this thing together. Do you guys start as soon as the national championship ends? I mean, when do you start compiling this information?
Yeah, and actually, what we do, we've already started on next year's magazine as far as pulling over the pages, dropping in next year's schedules, working on some of the notes that we have on the matchups for next year for teams that aren't playing each other this year. We can do all that now. But in earnest, I usually begin the Monday after Thanksgiving, starting to write the magazine, and I start to go through all the teams for the upcoming season. What I do in that stretch is I read through every story that was written about the team for the season. It's usually about a stack of about 100 pages. We get it all into one report for me, and it usually takes me about 3 to 4 hours, and then basically I have a very good flavor of each team, and then I write the quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and special teams at that point. Now, each team I go through a 3 different write-through process. I've got December and January, then I go through it again March and April when the spring guides come out, and then I do one more run through the team through after the spring is over to make sure I've got all the information current. So I go through each process 3 times. We start writing it December 1st, and I end up finishing it about the middle of May, and a lot of information in there.
So so basically, as the season approaches, most of your work's already done then.
Yes, and in fact, June and July is my radio season months. It's sort of fun for me. There's no deadlines. There's none of those 80 to 100-hour work weeks. I just do talk football, and if it's 8 to 10 radio shows a day, that's just fun for me at that point. June and July are definitely my favorite 2 months of the year.
Yeah, it sounds like the pressure's off, and you get to kind of just enjoy your work and enjoy the season. So, yeah, it's got to – you guys are doing an amazing job out there. So we really appreciate you publishing this every year. Like I say, I mean, I use mine to death, to the point where it's just torn up. So we definitely put it to good use. So if you don't mind, we'll just jump right into the season. We're here in Salt Lake City, so we cover all the local teams around here. BYU is kind of the big favorite around here, so maybe we'll start with them if you don't mind.
Yeah, and when you look at BYU, they could be poised for a big-time season this year. And part of it's due to the fact I think the schedule gets a little softer than it was last year. Playing as a independent is never a great thing right now. I know BYU would love to get into a Power 5 conference, but when you look at this team, you got Taysom Hill at quarterback. Now, Hill last year only completed about 54% of his passes. And, my first question when I think of BYU is, what's up with all these running quarterbacks lately? But I think Hill's going to improve as a passing QB. He, of course, is a dangerous runner. Led the team in rushing, 1,344 yards last year. Pretty good running back handoff to Jamal Williams. Williams rushed for 1,233 yards last year, averaged 5.7. The receiving core is underrated. They lose their top 2 guys from last year. I expect better production. You look at a Ross Apple, who's a big-time transfer. Devon Blackman, who comes in from Oregon, a big-time transfer. There's a JUCO coming in, my number 46 rated JUCO. So they've got a lot of talent at the receiver spot, and I like the tight ends as well. Now, the offensive line, I thought underperformed last year. I actually think their offensive line is going to be pretty good this year, rated as one of the top units. That has surprised a lot of BYU fans so far, but I'll take it back to maybe the Florida days 2 years ago. Florida had a horrible secondary in 2011, yet in 2012, I said Florida's secondary is going to be one of the top units in the country. And a lot of folks said, did you watch any of their games last year? I said, yes, but they have talent. They've played well on defense before, and I expect much improvement. And Florida's defensive secondary was one of the best secondaries in college football in 2012. Heck, they almost made the national championship that year. When you look at BYU, their offensive line is usually a very solid group, and the coaching staff hasn't changed. They still know how to coach. They've got a veteran group coming back. I look for big-time improvement on the offensive line this year. Defensively, losing guys like Kyle Van Noy and a couple others from the squad, I don't know if the defense will be quite up to last year's standard, but it's still going to be pretty good. Bronson Kafusi back at the outside linebacker spot. There is good talent there. And then when you look at the schedule, I only have an underdog in 3 games this year. At Texas, and yes, they beat Texas handily last year at home. At UCF, that's in Bright House Stadium, one of the tougher venues out there, and UCF's loaded on defense. And at Boise State, it's always tough to win on the blue turf. Now, BYU also beat Boise State at home last year by 17 points. So I think if you're a BYU fan, you can picture this BYU team winning all their games this year. In fact, the 3 games I have an underdog in are all by 7 points or less, with one of them by a field goal. So this is a BYU team who, if they stay healthy, catch a few breaks, could be poised for a pretty good season this year. I'm looking for more of a 9-10 win season.
Yeah, I think you're hitting that right on the head, Phil. My question to you is, like you mentioned, the defensive side of the ball loses some big names in Van Noy and others. Do you think the front 7 will be able to help protect the back 4, the cornerbacks and safeties in passing? That's my main concern for BYU. I think you're right. Offense is going to be improved. The offensive line is going to do better. I think they're going to score a lot of points. My only question is, can they shut down some teams like Texas and Houston and UCF and Boise State, even Nevada with their offense? Will they be able to, shut them down? I say the offense has a bad day.
Yeah, that's a big question. Now, keep in mind, last year's defense only had 3 returning starters. Yes, Kyle Van Noy was back, and that's what pretty much everybody talked about. But last year, with just 3 returning starters, the sack total dropped to 24 from 34 the previous year. Now, this year, overall, BYU's got 6 returning starters, including 3 to the front 7. So experience-wise, they're more experienced on defense than they were last year. They just lose some of their key players. So I think that the front line should be able to put at least as much pressure, 24 sacks last year, on the opponents. And with the veteran secondary, I think they will be improved.
And thinking about, I know they've struggled over the last 4 years on the road, especially opening the year. They narrowly escaped, and got a win down at Ole Miss last year in Virginia. And they start out with 2 games on the road versus a Connecticut team, which they're obviously going to be the favorites, and a Texas team, which it's kind of a toss-up. Who knows what we're going to get with Strong taking the helm down there in Austin. Do you think they come out of there 1-1, apparently?
Out of which road games?
The first 2, Connecticut and Texas.
Oh, yeah, I've got them 1-1. I definitely see them winning at Connecticut. In fact, I think that game, too. When you look at Connecticut, they've got a new head coach. They play in the AAC. And in the AAC, the competition level is not like a Power 5 conference. I know they received an automatic bowl bid last year, but that was the last year of the BCS. I can see BYU going on the road beating Connecticut. Having to play Texas the next week after flying back in from the East Coast is benefited from the fact that that Connecticut game comes on a Friday night. And I think BYU is going to be confident when they face Texas, but I do have Texas winning that game. So I'm looking for a 1-1 start for the Cougars. But like I said, in the 3 games I have BYU an underdog this year, none of them are by more than a touchdown.
Yeah, I would agree. And, definitely Texas has an axe to grind with BYU after what happened last year for sure.
Yes.
And it's tough to get those teams, particularly Texas and Boise State, and even UCF on the road. That's really difficult. There's been a lot of talk locally about kind of the soft schedule and what would happen if BYU were to go undefeated. Now, let's just throw out a huge hypothetical here. If they were to go undefeated, do you think they have any chance at getting into the playoff?
It'd be tough because I think a lot of folks are going to look at the overall schedule and they're going to look at the matchups versus Power 5 conferences. And if you look at the amount of Power 5 teams that BYU faces this year, they do take on Texas and they play Virginia, and California. So there's 3 Power 5 teams where some of the other conferences they're going to have 10. But if there's a year, I think, for a non-Power 5 conference team to break through, I think it would be in the first 2 years of the playoffs. I believe we are headed to the point where Power 5 conference is going to start scheduling themselves more than they are now, and that's going to really leave the little guys, or the teams that aren't Power 5, out of the equation. So I think if it is going to happen, it'd be the first two. I think their best case scenario and the way they could make it. Let's say Houston wins the AAC this year, and yet BYU beats them handily by a couple of scores. Let's say BYU goes into Texas and wins, yet Texas rebounds and has a pretty good year in Big 12 play. Let's say they beat UCF on the road, and UCF's right up there with Houston in the AAC. They beat Boise State on the road, and it's Boise State's only loss of the year, and Boise State has knocked off Mississippi. And then, of course, Cal has a rebound year this year, makes it to a bowl game, and BYU knocks it off. I think if all those factors come into the equation, then BYU's got a shot at it. But I think for any non-Power 5 team this year, the chances are pretty slim. But, BYU's got a tough enough schedule, I think, which could have them at least in the mix, in the equation.
Okay, and then my other question, then we'll get moving on to the other schools, is, they play Utah State. It's at home at LaVell Edwards Stadium in Provo, and this is, in recent years, this has been quite the rivalry. In fact, these games have been pretty competitive. Do you see any sort of slip-up against Utah State?
Yeah, it all depends on what's going on with Chucky Keaton. I think if Chucky Keaton is 100% healthy this year, they can knock off anybody on their schedule. Chucky Keaton's just a dynamic quarterback that can get it done. They are coming off a bye week, so the fact that it's a Friday on a short week won't affect them. And last year when BYU beat Utah State on the road, Chucky Keaton, of course, was out and injured, and then in the second half and missed the rest of the game. But you look at the last time Utah State came in here to BYU, 6-3 was the final score, and it came right down to the wire. I believe there was a missed field goal at the end of the game, wasn't there?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yep, there was.
And and for BYU fans out there, the casual fans, who's the one player not named Hill or Williams or Kafusi who they should look out for to make a real impact this year on either side of the ball?
I'm going to say Devin Blackman. Blackman was he's 6'1", 185. He's got speed. He was a big-time recruit when he signed originally at Oregon. He was my number 7 rated wide receiver out of high school. He came in, and I don't think he's had the prima donna attitude. Sometimes those big-time transfers come in, and they think, well, we don't have to work hard. We just go ahead and step on the field. But he seemed to have a great attitude in the spring. I think he can have that impact, and maybe even a Jordan Leslie, who, of course, if you don't follow CUSA, here's a guy that had nearly 1,000 yards receiving at UTEP 2 years ago. And last year they had poor quarterback play, so his numbers dropped off a little bit. But I think he's 6'3", 210 in quality. So, like I said, the BYU receiving corps is going to surprise a lot of folks this year.
So if BYU comes in at the end of the year with 9 wins before a bowl game, that's considered a success, or are you looking for 10 double digits this year?
I think 9 is a successful season. I mean, it's not a cakewalk through the schedule. You look at some of the games they've got them favored over. I think when you look at the end of the season, Houston's a team that has just 1 or 2 losses this year, 3 at the tops. Virginia's a team that very well could make it back to a bowl. Utah State is a contender in the Mountain West Conference. And even that Cal game at the end of the year. Cal last year suffered a myriad of injuries, and it was the first year for a new head coach. They're going to be a much improved team this year. So I think 9 wins against this schedule would be a good season for BYU. But and that's what I expect. I do expect 9.
9 it is. You heard it here. All right, let's move on to Utah. Now, as a Utah fan, it has been a slim pickings. We have had not much to cheer about over the last few years. It looks like this year, based on some of your prognostications, we're in for a very similar season, although you did say that you think they've got a good shot at making a bowl game.
Yeah, I'm going to write an article for ESPN Insider, and I haven't firmed it up completely yet, but what I'm going to do this year is my most improved list. If you look at the front of my magazine, I have the most improved list there, and that has a track record of 70% of the teams that make that list go from a losing record last year to bowl eligibility this year. Now, how does that compare with what teams normally do? Believe it or not, the numbers are actually closer to 20% of the teams that have a losing record 1 year become bowl eligible the next year. That means the majority of them stay losing programs. So 70% is a great track record. And what I'm going to do for ESPN Insider later on in August is I've talked to probably 80 to 90 coaches this year across the country, and I'm going to put the teams that would have made my most improved list had I talked to the coaches prior to the magazine coming out. I think Utah's is a candidate clearly to get there. In fact, I've got them favored at 5 games. It means they need to pull 1 upset this year. And look at last year's games, for example. The Oregon State game was a game they had the lead. Thought they were going to win it. They end up losing in overtime. Stanford, they knock off number 5 Stanford at home. UCLA, Utah throws 6 interceptions in that game, yet somehow, some way, they're down by 7 and have the ball at the end of the game. Arizona State's a game they clearly should have won, once again blowing a lead at the end of the game. So last year's team was an underdog in all those games. They could easily have won them. They just need to break through and pull one upset. And when you look at Utah, I think the first part that I like the best is the improvement on the offensive line, especially at the tackle spot. I think that's going to be a big plus. Last year they were expecting a couple of JUCOs to come in, didn't make it, and they had a few struggles in the offensive line, but I think that'll be improved. I like the running backs. They were fun to watch in the spring game, Booker and Poole, and even McCormick, who probably play a little slot receiver this year as well. Travis Wilson battling Kendall Thompson at the quarterback spot is going to be intriguing. 2 different types of QBs. We'll see who ends up winning it. But defensively, Utah's defensive line is always good. They're solid at linebacker, and overall, it's a pretty good team. They get Bletchen back in the secondary. So this is a Utah team that might just make that list when I do the ESPN Insider. They're going to have to pull one upset this year and take care of business as a favorite to get there. But it wouldn't surprise me to see them even achieving more than that because much like with BYU, where I talked about I don't have a large underdog in that many games, there's 4 games this year only have Utah less than a touchdown underdog. The only 3 that are more than that are at Michigan, at UCLA, and then at Stanford. Those are all games which I clearly expect Utah to lose, but that means the other ones are up for grabs.
Well, I hope so badly that they're able to pull up, at least one upset and get to that elusive bowl game because it's been a dry spell, and we haven't faced a dry spell like that in a long time. So my question for you is about the quarterback position. You mentioned that Travis Wilson and Kendall Thompson are kind of battling it out. All the local news here, the rumors are that Travis Wilson's kind of sealed that up, but, he's got a tendency to get injured. And if he gets injured, how much of a drop-off is that going to Kendall Thompson, who is, he's a transfer from Oklahoma, so obviously he can play, but I'm just wondering what your opinion is of the drop-off we'll get in performance at the quarterback position.
I don't see a drop-off. In fact, I give Kendall Thompson a good chance of actually winning that starting job. You look at last year, Travis Wilson, 16 touchdown passes, but 16 interceptions. He completed 56% of his passes. He's a big kid in the pocket. Surprisingly, he's more mobile than you would think. You look at him and you think prototypical pocket passer at 6'7", 240 pounds. But Wilson did run for close to 500 gross yards rushing last year. So I do like his mobility, but that whole concussion thing, that's a little concerning. And you have to have a backup plan in place. And I think Kendall Thompson not only comes in with a backup plan, but a guy that's going to compete for the starting job. Now, he didn't look great. Well, late last year, he came off the bench at the start of the third quarter. I believe it was against Oklahoma State. Did not look good. Blake Bell had to replace him, and then they ended up pulling out the win. He only hit 413 passes last year. But there's no denying that he gives a different dimension to the offense. He's a good runner, and he is a good passer. Despite his stats from last year, I think he can go out and complete a good percentage of his passes. I'm pretty high on Kendall Thompson, so I think he can come in and is a legitimate contender for that starting job. And should something happen to Wilson, I don't think we're going to see a great drop-off statistically.
Let's talk about the Utah defense. Kind of been the calling card through their runs in the BCS, busting, the Fiesta. Although the offense was great that year and in the Sugar, the defense really kind of held their own against some of the bigger schools and has been the calling card of Utah under Kyle Whittingham. Last year they struggled a bit. They gave up a lot of points. I think 7 was the lowest against Weber State. My question to you is, where can we expect to see some improvements defensively in the linebacker position, maybe with Paul, even though he injured his foot in April? And do you think the Utes will be able to generate more turnovers? It seems like last season they didn't get any turnovers.
Yeah, I think there will be more turnovers this year. And I write an article in the magazine every year which is called Turnovers Equals Turnaround. And it says that teams that have minus double-digit turnovers one year usually improve the next. Utah was almost in that category. They were minus 9 in turnovers last year. So I can see improvement there. The linebacking core is the strength of the defense. I rated the number 21 linebacking core in the country. But up front, I just every year look at Utah's defensive line, and it doesn't matter if they have 0, 1, 2, 3 starters. They always put out a productive unit, and that's really what they get the highest caliber of NFL caliber players on the defensive line. I think it's a pretty good deep unit this year. So there's good depth. So despite losing the starters that they do up front, and they do lose 3 starters up front, I think the D-line will be capable. Getting Bletchen back in the secondary is big to team with a couple of experienced cornerbacks. So overall, I feel Utah's defense is stronger than last year's defense. and hopefully they can have the same type of pressure. Last year's defense did record 39 sacks, which is their most in quite some time. They're going to have to, with losing 3 guys up front, it'll be interesting to see if they can top that number this year.
The Utes have the 8th most difficult schedule according to your rankings. What you said you had them favored in 5 games. What 5 are those?
Idaho State at home, Fresno State at home, Washington State at home, Arizona at home, and then at Colorado on the road. Those would be the 5 I would have my favorite in.
And if you had to choose, for them to become bowl eligible like you spoke about earlier, they have to pull off one upset. Which game do you see being the one? Maybe a Michigan or a USC?
I think the 3 games they have the best shot are USC at home, and we saw last year they can knock off Stanford at home. And when they do play USC, USC the previous week is playing, they're on their 5th straight game, and Utah would have had a bye 2 weeks ago. So it's a pretty nice situation. Back at home, first home game in a month. It's a game Utah is going to be fired up for. I give them a shot at the Arizona State game. Remember last year, I thought they outplayed Arizona State, probably should have won. Arizona State's in a little bit of a rebuilding mode this year, experience-wise, and I think they can go on the road and possibly get that one. And then I'm not going to discount the Oregon game even. This is an Oregon team that, is coming off a massive game. Oregon is playing Stanford. If you ask anybody at Oregon off the record, what's the most important game of the year, it's beating Stanford. Stanford's beat them the last 2 years. Stanford's been the reason they haven't been playing for the Pac-12 title. That is Oregon's biggest game of the year. They will be fired up. It's massive. It's at home. And if they win, you're in a natural letdown spot. As mentioned, Utah last year I thought caught Stanford in a little bit of a letdown spot and pulled the upset, even though it's Oregon, and Oregon's one of the best teams. And I believe the early Vegas line on that is Oregon, a 20-point favorite. I love the situation because Utah is at home. They'll be fired up for that game, and I think that would be a potential upset as well.
You can't see me right now, but I am grinning ear to ear. I am so happy to hear that. So you think it is possible that Utah could be that late season stumble for Oregon then that they typically have?
Yeah, and we saw it in the Pac-12 last year. Remember Stanford upsets Oregon at home, big game. They go on the road the very next week. USC upsets them, and I've seen it quite a few times in college football throughout the years. And really, like I said, if you're looking at all the teams that are going to play one 8+ game all year, you can't really come up with a lot for teams. There isn't a game that's that much more important than every other game they play. But I think for Oregon, they have heard for 2 years how Stanford is out physical, to beat them down. They've got the style of offense Oregon can't stop. I know that there can't be a day that goes by in practice where they're not talking about Stanford.
Sure.
So I think it's a good letdown spot.
Ooh, I like to hear that. Okay. All right, one last question for Utah, and then we'll move on to our last team. I'm curious as to what you expect from the running game for the Utes, because typically when we struggle at the quarterback position, which has been a situation that has happened way too much in recent years, the running game has always been pretty steady. And I'm curious to hear what you think about this upcoming season, what we can expect from the running backs.
Well, they're going to have to keep Booker and Poole healthy. And I think if they do that, then Utah's got a capable 1-2 punch there. You look at Booker, he's got great balance. He's explosive. He can take it to the house, and he's 209 pounds. You look at Poole, I don't know if he's an every single down back, but he's a dependable player. He's reliable. He's good in pass protection. And, he's around the 200-pound mark as well. So I think those two guys, if they can stay healthy, will provide Utah with a very capable 1-2 punch there.
All right, well, let's move on to Utah State. This is our last in-state school that we like to cover. Aggie fans have been very happy in recent years. Gary Anderson really resurrected this program, put it on the map. Matt Wells has taken over. What can you expect to see from this new coach?
I got to tell you, last year, and I told this to Coach Wells as well when I talked to him this summer, I said, what kind of speech should you give your team? Because here you are, you've lost Chucky Keaton, the one player that everybody would have thought you can't lose him. They had lost their top running back to injury in Joe Hill, but they had just lost to Boise State 34-23. So now they're a game down to Boise State in the Mountain West standings. And overall, they're 3-4. Without Chucky Keaton, you're headed for a losing season. When the smoke clears after that second half of the year, Utah State's playing for the Mountain West Championship, getting past Boise State in the standings. I couldn't even have fathomed the thought of that. Yeah, if I could have bet my house that wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have a house right now because you wouldn't think Utah State even had that chance. I thought Matt Wells did an incredible job getting that team to 5 straight wins down the stretch, getting them to the bowl game despite being undermanned at the most important positions, quarterback and running back down the stretch. Now, Chucky Keaton's back this year, and that, of course, is the big thing. Can Chucky Keaton be like Chucky Keaton was in the past? And if he is, they could be dangerous. You look at Darryl Garrettson, who last year they were going to redshirt him. Harrison replaced Keaton, struggled a little bit. Then they said, you know what, take the redshirt off Garrettson. Let's go let him play. He's a coach's kid. He's tough mentally. And he came in and did well. It wouldn't surprise me if Keaton stays healthy if they end up getting that red shirt for Garrettson this year, giving him 3 years to be the starter. So that'll be an interesting battle to watch. Joe Hill's back at the running back spot. He was out for the spring, and we'll see. Hopefully he'll be able to get his completeness back there. But overall, Utah State's one of the least experienced teams in the country. They're number 110 in my experience rankings. They only have 3 starters back on offense, 5 on defense. But I just love the job they're doing there at Utah State. As you mentioned, Gary Anderson, now Matt Wells stepping in. Despite the fact the offensive line's got 1 starter back, they feel pretty good about the line itself. That defense was dominant, and really the reason that they did make it to the Mountain West title game last year. Played tremendous down the stretch, even shutting down David Carr and Fresno State in that Mountain West title game, which they came up just short in. I think that defense, despite only having 5 starters back, will still be solid. You look at the schedule this year, I got them an underdog at Tennessee in the opener, at BYU on a Friday night, at Colorado State, slight underdog there, and then at Boise State. So those would be the 4 games that have an underdog. But, last year Utah State was probably a team that wasn't as favored in that many games, but came out with a pretty good season getting the Mountain West title game. I think that game, the final game of the season, November 29th, will determine whether or not they can repeat as Mountain West champs. It's pretty tough to win on that blue turf.
Yeah, without a doubt. So do you think Chucky Keaton, I mean, he's a mobile quarterback. Do you think he's going to be able to maintain that play after coming back from the injury?
That's a big question. And, the reports naturally, every time a kid comes back from an injury, all the reports you get are, oh, yeah, he's close to 100%, close to 100%. I'm going to wait to see on the field if he's close to 100%. But if he is, and we've seen remarkable recoveries from ACLs in recent years. There's players that come back and play that same season or 6 to 8 months later and have had the full recovery. He's had almost a full year since the injury to really get back. So if he is, and he is the same type of dynamic player, then I think Utah State's going to be a team to be reckoned with.
And with only 8 returning starters on both sides of the ball, Utah State has been in a lot of those early season games against power conferences, whether we go back to Auburn, Wisconsin, just barely losing on a field goal miss. And you mentioned that you had them as an underdog going into Tennessee on August 31st. What's the possibility they could come out and finally all those experiences, and I know there's limited returning starters, but Chucky Keaton's one of them, and he's experienced some of those road losses. What's the chance they can go into Knoxville and pull off an upset versus the Volunteers, who are slightly down?
Well, the advantage to playing Tennessee in the first game of the season like that is that this year there is one team in the country that returned 0 starters on the offensive line and 0 starters on the defensive line. Only one, and that's the Tennessee Volunteers. They lose all 5 starters off the offensive line. They lose all 4 starters off the defensive line. Now, there's talent there, but it's the first game of the season. There are also a lot of their main skill players this year could very well be freshmen or redshirt freshmen or true sophomores, guys that because Butch Jones bringing in some incredible classes. Once again, you're looking at the first game of the season. So I think you have a Utah State team that's going to go in there confident in the fact that how they finished last season and the fact that Tennessee's very young at the line of scrimmage. And that's going to be a heck of a game. It's going to be hot in Tennessee that time of year. And so, down south they tend to have a little heat and humidity advantage. But I think the fact that Tennessee is so inexperienced along the lines in an opening game gives Utah State a good shot.
How much do you think, given that Chucky Keaton's working his way back in after a long camp, ACL injury, that the Aggies early on are going to rely on Joe Hill and the offensive line to run the ball and kind of get him acclimated to being, Chucky Keaton again in game live situations?
Yeah, that's going to be the key. We're going to have to see, it all depends. Maybe he is close to 100%, like some reports have said. And if he is, and he's not afraid to test the knee out, and he turns into Chucky Keaton 2 years ago. They've got that opportunity. I do think when you look at the running back core, I mean, let's face it, coming into last season, nobody expected a lot out of Joey DiMartino. Yet working behind that offensive line, he got up to the 1,200 yards. I don't know if the problem is necessarily skill players. I would question the younger offensive line with only one starter back this year, whether or not they're going to be able to do it. But once again, there's talent there. You look at Fisalau at the left guard spot. He was one of the most improved guys coming out of the spring. They've got decent size up front and spattering of experience. So it'll depend how the offensive line fares. But at least they're going against the Tennessee defensive line that's equally inexperienced.
I was going to ask you about the offensive line since they are returning one starter, I think you said?
Yes.
So they're returning one starter. That's going to be tough. I mean, even last year they allowed a lot of sacks. They didn't seem to be playing very strong. Do you think they're going to be able to, especially early in the season, be able to protect Chucky Keaton and keep him in the pocket, or is it a good thing that he's out running?
Yeah, it's a good thing you got a mobile quarterback when you have one returning starter on the offensive line. And like I said, when you look at a player like Fisalau, Coach Wells is pretty high on him, so he was one of the most improved guys coming out of the spring, one of their top 3 offensive linemen right now. Having a guy like Kevin Wimpy at left tackle is a very good place to start. This guy's extremely consistent, solid run blocker. He's solid, he's physical, and he's a leader as well. So I think they're going to be able to work that offensive line in. And after, like I said last year, you put a doubt in your mind when it comes to things. There is no way Utah State at 3-4 with one game down below Boise State in the standings. They have to hope Boise loses twice and they don't lose a game. They don't have their quarterback. They don't have their running back. How do you win the Mountain West? Boom, they're in the Mountain West title game last year. So if you do have a doubt at a position, I think Utah State's pretty good at overcoming those.
Yeah, and I mean, Matt Wells and the team last year really, triumphed through some difficult times, injuries and whatnot. So what are we looking? You say they're not going to be favored in 3. Are we looking another 9-win season and maybe, given November 29th game up on the blue turf, possible matchup again in the Mountain West Championship game?
Well, my official forecast for the team this year would be 8-4, and I've got them, like I said, an underdog at Tennessee, at BYU, at Colorado State, at Boise State. But then again, you look at Utah State last year. They're a team that can pull the upsets. Although interesting last year, none of their wins was as an underdog. They were favored in all their games last year that they won. So if they are an underdog in those 4 games and do drop them, then I'm looking for more of an 8-4 season. But like I said, mid-season last year, I wouldn't have forecast Utah State to be playing in the Mountain West title game, so they can surprise folks.
And we're talking with Phil Steele on KPDR and dogandeuce.com. We can't let you get out of here without talking college football playoff. It's what everyone's been, wanting for the last 8-9 years, and now it's here. Give us a rundown of how you see that play out and what power conferences sort of, take the luster away from it maybe.
Well, this is the format that I called for way back in 2000 in my magazine. We've gone through the first couple of years of the BCS, and I say, here's your perfect solution. Play 1 against 4, 2 against 3. You won't leave that third unbeaten team out of it. You keep the bowls intact. You keep the regular season intact. It really is the perfect scenario. Wrote about it for over a decade, and it's finally come to fruition, so I'm pretty thrilled about that. For this year, the one conference I have missing out on the Final Four playoffs is the Pac-12. And it's not because the Pac-12 is a weak conference, because the Pac-12 may be too strong of a conference. With Stanford and with Oregon, UCLA, USC, a much improved Washington this year, and the fact that they play non-conference games, I think the Pac-12 may go through a stretch where everybody knocks off everybody, whereas some of the folks in other conferences have a clearer path to the title. You look at Oklahoma this year, their road games this season, they take on a grand total of 1 team that had a winning record last year. That's Texas Tech. For Ohio State, about the only game you would look at them and say they're not a double-digit favorite would be the game at Michigan State on November the 8th. For Alabama, about the only 2 games they're not a double-digit favorite this year, or 3 games, I should say, at LSU, at Mississippi, and home against Auburn, but I think they're capable of winning all those. But if I'm going to rate one team in pen in my Final Four bracket right now, it's going to be the Florida State Seminoles. When I look at Florida State, they're probably the most complete team in the country. Their weakest area is the running backs, which I rate 12th best unit in the country. Well, if that's your weakness, you got a pretty strong team. In fact, all the other units rank in my top 10. Then you factor in the schedule this year. I actually have Florida State a double-digit favorite in every single one of their games. So I'm taking them in pen, filling them in my Final Four bracket, and we'll see what else shakes out.
Well, and I know you were just talking about the conferences and how the Pac-12 is now not benefiting from having a difficult conference, especially down south, SEC country. That is of extreme importance to people who follow teams in the SEC. And I was just wondering, when do you think the Pac-12 last year was ranked number 2, competed well against other power conferences, and when will we see maybe the Pac-12 break into this playoff format? And where at the top do they need to fall to get in here?
Well, they've been pretty close to breaking in there the last couple of years, and Oregon played Auburn a couple of years ago for the national title. So I don't think they're far off at all. Could very well be this year. It's just the way I looked at the season coming into the year was that I can see each of the Pac-12 teams absorbing a loss somewhere along the line. And my magazine's been the most accurate over the last 16 years, so I try to go with the ones with the highest probability of happening. But if you told me the Pac-12 was in the Final Four this year, I wouldn't doubt it at all. And I think when you do look at teams like Oregon and UCLA, those are two legitimate national title contenders. And once you get into the Final Four, anything can happen. So I don't know if the Pac-12 has to do a lot to get in there because they're right on the precipice this year.
And so in the top 4, you got Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Florida State being the number 1 seed. Are all those teams coming in undefeated then?
That's what my power ratings have coming into the season. But as you know, you could be 2 weeks to go in the final regular season, and you're like, oh, my goodness, we're going to have 7 unbeaten teams at the end of the year. And then, boom, things happen, and all of a sudden you're left with 1 by the end of the season. And some years you're left with 0. So, on paper, I could see all 4 teams running the table. Can they have that type of season and actually get there on paper? It's pretty unusual to see 4 unbeaten teams at the end of the year.
Absolutely. And you talked about Jimbo Fisher and Florida State. They're stacked, and you have them repeating. Jameis Winston, he's only going to get better. Do you think, this could be one hell of a run Florida State could go on given the recruiting class and Jameis Winston's, second year of being a quarterback?
Yeah, I think Winston will probably turn pro this year. I know he came back and said he won't, but I got to think if Winston has another national title under his belt, he'll definitely come out next season. But, Florida State's one of the deeper teams in the country. I'll go back to 2 years ago when I said Florida State has the number 1 defensive line. I said I would have put their 3rd-string defensive line in my top 25 because they had a couple of my number 1 rated recruits out of high school playing on the defensive line on the 3rd string. Now, naturally, those guys are now moved up the charts and starting for them. But when you look at Florida State, they have got talent stacked upon talent at each position, sort of resembling almost an Alabama. Not quite Alabama. Alabama gets top recruiting class every single year, but they are loaded at each position and very deep.
Phil Steele's College Football Preview 2014. Go pick it up. This thing is a college football fanatic's best friend. I look at it multiple times a day. I'm flipping through it. I absolutely love it. Thank you for doing this each and every year. It's been a great run, 20 years. I can't even believe it. And you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's a lot of fun talking football with you guys today. Always look forward to it. And, check out it. You can actually get the magazine downloaded to your iPad or iPhone or Android device for just $9.99. You can do that on iTunes or Google Play, so check that out as well. But a lot of fun talking football with you guys, and have a good, solid football season.
You too, and relax. You've definitely earned some time off, so go ahead and relax and enjoy the season.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right.
Hi, this is Greg Wrubell, the voice of the Cougars, and you're listening to Dog and Deuce.
That is Greg Wrubell.
Going to be hearing a lot of him.
A lot of him.
A lot of him, a lot of Bill Riley.
Definitely.
And many others. Now, my wife told me the other day, I was like, football season, here it is. About 7 days away. She's like, great. Basically, you become inapproachable, irritable, and don't want to do anything on Saturday, Sunday.
Right.
I was like, yeah, that's pretty much good.
My wife refers to it.
You've learned.
Yeah, exactly. At least she gets it now.
Yeah.
My wife Ashley refers to it as she is a football widow during the football season. But I keep telling her, college football is only 3 months a year.
Right.
So it's not a big deal,
And the other 9
That's
months, you don't even like me.
Right, exactly.
So,
exactly.
give me a break.
It's a vacation for her.
Right.
She should be happy.
Yeah.
But we do want to thank Phil Steele. Dude has just so much information. We didn't even tell him we were going to talk about the Aggies, but he knew everything about the team. I can't imagine having that much knowledge.
It's really funny because he knows everything. He's got good predictions. He's normally spot on. It's the most accurate of all the preview magazines that come out every year.
Definitely.
And, he's just a great guy to work with. I think whether you're a Ute, Cougar, or Aggie, or those are the teams you root for, whether you went to school there or not, you learned a lot about where your team's weaknesses are, what are realistic expectations, as well as, the upset games that he has maybe picked out, especially for the Utes. That was a shocker for us.
Oof.
That was a big one.
I was very happy to hear that.
Anytime you can stamp on a duck, I'm unless it's a mallard, I support it.
Well, I was happy about that. I mentioned I was happy about that, but he's not the only one who's actually predicted that game as a possible upset.
Right.
I don't think he was going to go so far to call it.
Right.
But he went about as far as he was willing to go, which is to say a lot because Oregon's good.
Oregon's good. They're always good.
And Utah's not so good.
Probably not going to be so good. Here's the thing. And you know what? You can say this at the beginning of every season, whether it's the Jazz, the Cubs, they're probably not going to be very good. A lot of things have to go right, but it seems the last few years, especially up on the Hill, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, whether it's injured quarterbacks, injured defensive players, just untimely mistakes or 6 interceptions and you lose to the 10th ranked team in the country by a touchdown. This is really a make or break year. I don't know I think Kyle Whittingham's job's getting to that point where it's certainly going to be in the realm of possibilities.
Definitely. You're going to hear a lot of talk. If he doesn't get him to a bowl game this year, and honestly, and you know what? Let's jump into this. Let's start doing this. We got about 12 minutes left. Let's give our season predictions. Right now, as it stands, the Utes have one of, if not the most difficult schedule in all of college football. And that's and especially when if you're Kyle Whittingham and you're faced with win or go home, like you got to get to a bowl game or there's a very good chance you're fired. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Well, he's under pressure. I mean,
definitely.
This is the year where, the kind of, capital he's built up from the winning of Alabama, the undefeated season, the chance. Look, since the Utes have joined the Pac-12, it's been a story of near misses, whether we like it or not. First year, he had the opportunity to make a splash. Sure, USC was struggling, couldn't go to the championship game, couldn't go to a bowl game. Doesn't matter. They don't put that in the record books. Utah fans didn't care about that, and they lost to Colorado. There needs to be something special, at least a 6-6 season, I think.
Definitely.
Or you're going to start hearing it. And, given the schedule, I find it very difficult to find 6 wins on this schedule.
Me too. I'm really struggling.
I have them going 5-7, my 5 wins, and there's maybes here and there. I think they'll start out 2-0. And my toss-up games that they have to win, 3 to 4 of these, 4 to get to a bowl game is Colorado, Arizona. They always play pretty tough. Washington State and Michigan. They got to win those games, I think, to get to a bowl game.
Definitely.
I can't see them beating UCLA.
Definitely not. I don't see them beating UCLA. I mean, I could go through all these teams. Honestly, Fresno State even scares me a bit.
Absolutely.
They've been pretty good in recent years. In fact, our good friends of the Dog Bite podcast have been on this show before. In fact, maybe we'll see if we can get them on. They know that team in and out, and that's a good team. Michigan scares me. I understand Michigan's had some down years for them, but in the big house, they have lost 1 game. I can't remember how many years it's been. But while they've been struggling, they get it done at home. That's going to be insanely difficult.
Yeah, the thing about that is I know they'll be up for that game. That's why I give them a good shot.
Right.
And they're, like you say, they're a little bit down more than you would expect out of, Go Blue. But it's really the meat of the Pac-12 schedule is what you got to think. I mean, they got to pull off an upset somewhere in here. Washington State, Oregon State, Arizona State. I know Phil Steele is going with Oregon and Stanford. I just don't see those.
I don't either.
I'll be tickled to death if we get one of them, but I don't.
In fact, if that happens, we'll have him back on the following week and give him props.
Absolutely.
Just to say, dude, you picked it.
Yeah.
Good job, man.
Yeah, I mean.
Honestly, I have the Utes going 4-8. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a really difficult year. I know, he also said they have a very good chance to go to a bowl game with this schedule, though. And in recent years, how we've seen the offense managed, even in times of crisis, even though things have gone wrong for them, injuries and whatnot, I still think it's been mismanaged, and I don't see any reason to see that tide changing anytime soon. I'm sorry, I know it sucks.
Yeah, I think 5-7 is pretty good year actually, given the schedule. 6-6 would be heroic.
So with this schedule, real quick, and then we have to move on. But with this schedule, if they go 5-7, I know everyone's going to be calling for Kyle Whittingham's head. But with this schedule, do you think that's a pretty good job?
I mean, really? Here's the problem. There's just so many question marks on the offensive side for me. The line's supposed to be improved, but quarterback, can they stay healthy? Bubba Poole, can he fill in at running back? Kenneth Scott's going to be a big help, with Drez taking double teams off him, especially in the red zone. 5-7, if he gets to 6-6, I think that quells sort of the calls from the Boo Birds, if you will, for his job. 5-7, I wouldn't be too angry about, but 6-6 is what he needs to get. He needs to see a bowl game.
Definitely
needs to see a bowl game. And, just for me, my 5 wins is Idaho State, Fresno State, Washington State, Arizona, and Colorado. I think they open the season, 3-1, and then lose a lot of games in between and finish the season 2-0.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little BYU. They've got a much easier schedule, a much easier road, if you will. And things they're looking good there, but things always look good in the preseason for the Cougars. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade, right? It always, the word always down there at the beginning of the season is that they're going to kill it.
Right.
And, most of the time they have. But there have been many times they've disappointed, particularly in big games. So give us a breakdown. What do you see happening?
Look, the week 1 is not going to be as easy a game as I think Cougar fans want to hear. Going to the East Coast, they've had trouble traveling in past years, even though they got a win at Ole Miss. Still, when they go on the road, those long-distance road trips, they're not very good. We talked about that with Phil Steele.
Yep.
I see the Cougars going 8-4, and their 4 losses coming to Texas, Utah State, Central Florida, and Boise State. I think those are the 4 games the Cougar fans.
Did you say Utah State?
Yep.
Okay.
Utah State, I think they'll lose to, even though it's at home. But, going on the road to Texas after an East Coast trip, I see that as a loss. Central Florida, Phil still talked about it, Bright House Stadium is difficult. And Boise State, going up there to Idaho, is always difficult on the blue Smurf turf. 8-4, still a good year. Probably below some of the standards or expectations of Cougar fans.
Okay, you have them 8-4.
8-4.
I have them at 10-2.
Wow,
that's a 10-win season. But with that said,
10-2.
I think this is a more difficult schedule than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I think everyone's thinking this is a cakewalk. It's not a cakewalk. Like you said, Connecticut, that's going to be a tough game.
Jamal Williams out.
Jamal Williams is out. I think it's going to be a tough game. I still think they get it done. My losses are Texas. I think Utah State, I think they'll beat them like they have in recent years. I think it'll be a close game as always, but I think they'll get it taken care of. And then my other one was, where am I at? Boise State. I think that'll be difficult on the Smurf turf.
Yeah,
that's always difficult. But a couple trap games. Virginia, look, man, I know it's Virginia. Struggled with them in the past.
Lost to them last year.
It's that could be a trap game. It is at home though. I think it's going to put them over. And plus, they're going to play much better at home. I don't think they'll have much trouble with them, but I honestly expect them to maybe struggle a little bit in the first half, but then take it away. Houston's not a bad team. They've had some down years, but in the last decade or so, they've been pretty good. So expect possibly a surprise, coming from Houston. But I really see this as a 10-2 team with a more difficult schedule than a lot of people are giving them credit for.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a lot more difficult schedule than meets the eye at first glance. The reason I have them going 8-4 is mostly because of those road losses. All mine, except for one, are on the road. They struggle on the road under Bronco.
Sure.
And so I see those 3 losses against Texas, Boise State, and Central Florida on the road as losses. And then I think, Utah State has an axe to grind. Chucky Keaton has an axe to grind, and they get it done October 3rd in Provo.
I agree. Real quick question. Move on to Utah State, and then we're about out of time. How in the world did Tom Homo get Cal on the schedule at the very last game of the season? How did he do that? We can't play, Utah can't play BYU last game of the season, but for some reason the Pac-12 will let Cal play him at the last game of the season?
Well, it's because Cal's Cal, and they don't got anyone to play.
Good point.
Stanford doesn't want to play him anymore. No, I thought Stanford was always Cal's last game of the year. The infamous band running onto the field game. I don't know how he did
I'm
it.
just saying, look, Pac-12 team, okay, forget the rivalry being suspended for a couple years. My complaint is, if we're playing BYU, why are we playing them third game? There's no reason we can't be playing them the last game of the year. Pac-12's letting Cal do it, so why can't we do it? We have a history with BYU. It drives me crazy.
Yes, it does. Me too.
But Cougar fans, I think you got a lot to cheer for this year. Do you think it's a disappointing season for 8-4?
8-4, I don't think Cougar fans will be happy with. Given the schedule and all the really difficult games on the road, I think it's a pretty good year.
I agree. All right, we've got to blow through this. We're probably not going to have time for the Josh Shaw story, so apologize. Many apologies to everyone out there. Utah State, let's get into this. They're, Mountain Division champions?
Mountain Division champs last year.
Not Mountain West Conference champs.
No,
Mountain Division
they lost
champs.
in the conference championship game.
Okay, what do you see here?
Dude, I see Utah State having a big year. And I think their only game, unfortunately, comes, and it could be a battle, their only loss, 11-1, comes the last game of the year at Boise State on the Smurf turf. I think they roll in this Sunday.
You think they're going to beat Tennessee?
I do. I think they're going to roll in and exercise the demons of Auburn and Wisconsin. And I think Chucky Keaton, if he wants to get his Heisman campaign going, they got it going down there in Logan. No better way, prime time, Sunday night, going to Neyland Stadium and jab the Vols. Peyton Manning will probably be there and just give him the what's up from Texas. And Logan signed Chucky Keaton, my boy. He's going to have a big game.
What you go 11-1? Is that
11-1 with their loss to Boise State.
11-1. Well, I'll tell you this right now. If they can beat Tennessee, they're not going to have a problem with Boise State.
Tennessee's way low.
I don't care, man. I don't care.
Okay, we'll see.
I don't care. If they can go in there and beat Tennessee on the road, I don't care how, what their program's looking like right now. That's insane. That's more than anything, that's a huge moral victory. Huge.
Right.
Because they have struggled doing in these big games early on. They've struggled, heartbreaking losses. I really think that if they can do that, they're going to run the table. Having said that, I don't think they're going to do that. I see them going 10-2, just like BYU. Hopefully, they'll get to the Mountain West Championship game. That'll probably be enough to get them there. And if they play Boise State in that game, dare I say it, I think they can beat them the second time around.
Okay, well, you say 10-2, I say 11-1.
Now, how does it work in the Mountain West?
Because Boise's in the same division. They can't play them.
They can't.
No. So they would play someone like Fresno or I think San Jose is in the opposite division as well. They couldn't play them. That's why I think they won't be in the Mountain West Championship game because they'll lose last week in Boise.
Gotcha.
I think both those teams have a good chance at running the table. I know Boise's schedule is a little easier up front. But look, 11-1, even 10-2. Be a great year.
Great year.
I'm excited.
Hang your hat on it. Matt Wells, there you go.
Yep.
All right, we got about 10 seconds left. Thank you very much for watching the Dog and Deuce Show. As always, call or text the D&D Show voicemail and text line 801-477-7678. That's 801-47-SPORT. Send us an email at doganddeuce@gmail.com. I'm Dog.
And I'm Deuce.
And we'll see you next week. It's football season, baby.
Thanks for listening.